Hello, and welcome to this skills video. This time we're going to be looking at a paper 3 source question, and the idea is that we're going to look at a particular question and an answer to it and look at why that's a good answer. I'm just going to start with looking, as we often do, at the mark scheme here, and there's a couple of things to note coming out of that, but let's just kind of look at what they're after in the actual exam. We've put this into 3 columns for very good reasons, and that is because the exam board are looking for 3 things in your answers. They're looking for, quite simply, that you know and understand what the source is about, so source analysis, that you have some knowledge of the issues which they're asking the question about, that you can put the source into context. So it's very much contextual knowledge there, not just kind of knowledge generally. It has to be about what the source is looking at. And then finally, evaluation of content and provenance. This is reaching a judgment and being able to say whether the source is really useful, quite useful, fairly useful, or not very useful. Just if we scroll down, you can see, in fact, we scroll past the watermark, you can see the bottom couple of levels here, and this is where most of you will be certainly aiming to be, if not being. You can see just a couple of things here worth pointing out. So firstly, level 3, there's some analysis. You select the key points. You've shown understanding of the sources, but here there's analysis of the sources, interrogation of the sources, that you're making inferences. An inference is where you pull out from the source something that's there but is not really explicit. And so there you've really kind of got to go beyond just picking up surface level things. You've really got to interpret the source, and kind of use a little bit of knowledge and nous. And there, of course, confidence and discrimination. This, incidentally, is why we would say, look, try and make several points, not just 1 or 2, because if you make several points, you are likely to force yourself beyond just the obvious things in the source. Here in the middle, in the knowledge bit, contextual knowledge is used to explain what you're talking about, here to illuminate or discuss the limitations, that your knowledge is used in conjunction with what you've pulled out from here. And that's why it's contextual knowledge. And yeah, I mean, there's not a great deal of progression there, really. It's just kind of used better as you go on. And then here in the final column here, evaluation will take into account the weight the evidence will bear. And what that means is that you're saying, yeah, how valuable is this? How much confidence can you put in what the source is suggesting? And it's fully substantiated, that you've got really good reasons for saying that. Let's have a look as well, because there is stuff about taking into account, well, the nature or purpose of the source material here. The provenance is used too. In their feedback, the exam board, so this was written before any exams were set, back in back before 2015. In all the feedback we've seen since, the exam board consistently says that the provenance needs to be linked to the content. And so here you've got this linked to here and to here. And really, I would say that what you're looking for is this kind of chain reaction, that you pick something out of the source, that you use your knowledge to suggest whether it's accurate or not, and that you then weigh up how helpful, how valuable that particular point is. And that's what we're going to see in the answer that we're going to have a look at. It is worth saying, just before we go and look at that question and the answer, that that the example does not ask you to write your source answer in a particular way, so long as you have shown an understanding of the source, a good understanding of the source, and the more in depth the better. So long as you've shown some good use of your own knowledge, and you've used that knowledge to explain the context, to explain what the source is on about, and so long as you've reached evaluation, that you've explained well, and you've thought about where the source has come from and what impact that makes upon its usefulness, so long as you've done those 3 things and done them well, then you will score high marks. There's no there's no prescription from the exam board as to how you write your answer. And because of that, there are different strategies available. Some people really like to do the sort of provenance stuff first and get it out of the way. Some people like to save that up for the end. I sort of think, though, it's quite helpful to put it through the answer if you can. And that's the strategy that we're going to see at work in this answer. But just to be very, very clear, it's not what the exam board demands. And I've seen high mark answers from the exam board that have done the provenance in a different way. So don't feel compelled to copy this. And it might be that the particular question you look at, or just the day you have in the exam, means that you write in a different way. And don't be too stressed about that. So let's just have a quick reminder of this particular question and of what all the paper 3 questions look like. So this start here, which we'll highlight in yellow, assess the value of the source. Remember, it's just one source in paper 3 for revealing. This bit is common to all paper 3 questions. So no matter whether you're doing Lancastrians and Yorkists or the Germany paper, you will get a question saying this. And then after that, it will ask you to look at 2 things. For revealing here, in this case, the beliefs of the Spartacists and the reasons for the Spartacist uprising in January 1919. So it will always be how valuable is this source for this and this. The Spartacists in this context, after the First World War, Germany's in quite a lot of upheaval. The Spartacists were a left-wing radical group who tried to seize power in an unsuccessful uprising in January 1919. And the source, which we won't read through, but the source was from their manifesto written about or published about 6 weeks before their uprising. So the beliefs are coming out of that manifesto, and the reasons are some of the reasons are prominent there, and not the reason that kind of made them think perhaps this is the time to seize ultimately, because it's written a bit before. It is worth saying here that the my default answer on the paper 3 question will be this source is valuable for one, but not both of these things. It's really valuable for one, but it's only quite valuable for the other. That is just the nature of sources, that it's likely to be more valuable for one than the other. And in this conclusion, you are completely at liberty to say that. It would be an unusual source to be really valuable for both of them. On the other hand, you wouldn't expect it to be rubbish for either of them, for both of them, because the exam board are unlikely to pick such a rubbish source. So let's have a look at this answer, and we're kind of looking at really how they structure it, because they've got all the elements in this in the way that they've answered it here. So we'll start off with the introduction. Again, you don't necessarily need an introduction in paper 3 source questions. It's not really demanded. There's nothing, flip back to this, there's nothing really demanded here about structure or organization in particular. But it's a helpful thing. And I have to say that all the good answers the exam board have published have all had pretty good introductions. So here we go. Source 2 precedes the Spartacist uprising of January 1919. So this is just clearly sort of laying out where the provenance is coming from. They've noticed when it was written, and that's a helpful thing to flag up. The content outlined within the manifesto does effectively highlight the beliefs of the Spartacists. So that's issue 1. It does do that. However, although there are valid reasons indicated for the Spartacist uprising, the source does also contain limitations within this aspect, thus decreasing the overall usefulness of the source. Let's highlight that bit there. So here what we've got in the introduction is a quick, rough and ready introduction to the answer that the student's going to give. The student's going to say that it is useful for the first issue and it's less useful for the second issue. Not useless, there are valid reasons, but not as useful because there are limitations to that. So here we go. The first argument clearly presented in source 2 regarding the beliefs of the Spartacists. So that's nice and clear here. This first paragraph then is going to be about the beliefs, and we'd expect them to see them picking out 2 or 3 of those beliefs that they can see in source 2. Let's just scroll down Here is the next paragraph. The second aspect highlighted within the source are the reasons for the Spartacus uprising in 1919. This is the second issue. So the first paragraph is looking at the first issue. Second paragraph is looking at the second issue, and scroll down again. Here is the conclusion. So it is quite nicely or very clearly structured, very straightforwardly structured, and I would say that's the way you want to go. Also, just while we're doing the kind of judgmenty bits, let's see here at the end. Overall, one can see the source is of significant value in reflecting the beliefs of the Spartacists. So that's not a nice mini conclusion there at the end of that paragraph. And here at the end of this paragraph, overall, the source proves to be less valuable in determining the reasons for the Spartacist uprising, which may be due to the source not being representative of the true political conditions in Germany. So this is a bit of own knowledge here. As it was published 2 months prior to the uprising, 2 months prior, just noting again that provenance and the impact the provenance has on the content. So that tying together of the provenance, like where the sources come from, who wrote it, when they wrote it, why they wrote it, what it is, and saying that has an impact upon the usefulness of a source, because in this particular instance, it's written a little bit too far in advance of the uprising to really give a clear indication of exactly why they rose up at that time. The general reasons should be fairly clear in it, but not the specific ones. So let's have a look at what they pick out from the source. The first argument clearly presented in source 2 regarding the beliefs of the Spartacists is that they have the ideology of the extreme left. So what are their beliefs? Oh, they're extreme leftists. Now we want to see that picked out from the source. You don't just want to kind of summarize what the source says. So they believe in the policies of communism. Yes, they did. This is shown by the anti-capitalist links made between the exploitation of masses of workers because of a capitalistic desire for profits during the war. Now, this it's not an amazing set of quotes here, but these are all extracted from the source, and they're kind of summarizing here what the source says, but showing that they're referring to the source. So that's good. They show an understanding of what the source is talking about there. And actually, if they've had to pull that out of 3 or 4 lines of the source, this is showing an interrogation of the source. It's very much helped though by their knowledge. The evidence for their communist beliefs is shown by the fact that in December 1918, Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, who were the Spartacist leaders, broke ties with the USPD and formed the KPD. A significant doctrine of which, let's keep going, a significant doctrine of which was to create a Soviet republic based on the rule of the proletariat. So that is their own knowledge. Now, this works 2 ways. The own knowledge here in this source answer is illustrating what the source has said. The source has sort of said, capitalistic and exploitation. They're showing hints of communist belief, but because the student already knew that they were communists, they were able to see that in there, and this is where they're kind of bringing in their own knowledge. So here, their own knowledge illuminates the source, but actually in reading the source, their own knowledge has helped them work out what the source is on about. And that's why really good knowledge of each depth topic is so important for paper 3. So they've got a point here, some evidence there, and then what you want to see here is highlighting the validity of the source in suggesting the extreme extent to which the Spartacists held strong anti-capitalist beliefs. This is saying, yeah, the source is valid. It says this, and that's right. It's useful because I know it's accurate. And that's really, I would say, always the test of a source. Is it accurate? Yes, I know it's accurate. Therefore, well, it must be valuable. Moving on then quickly, we should see the same thing done again. The second belief, which is highlighted by the source, is that the capitalist war has always been detested by the Spartacists, signified by the references. So this is the point they're making. Where's the quote? Signified by the references to the mass number of soldiers who, for the duration of the war, were driven to the slaughterhouse. Slaughterhouse, of course, being quite an emotive phrase to use for soldiers dying in the war, as if they never had a chance. That this is a war that's going nowhere. The validity of this point is supported by the fact that as early as December 1914, Liebknecht was the first member of the SPD to vote against war credits, which is how the German government funded the war, which is counter to some historians' viewpoint that as part of the SPD pre the First World War, the Spartacists also originally held pro-war beliefs. This source renders the latter viewpoint insignificant, as it is the Spartacist Manifesto. Spartacus Manifesto, rather. This enhances the validity of the source as it has been purposefully designed by the Spartacists to publicly promote their political beliefs. So they're saying here that this, the fact that they were against the war, we know that that they were against the war, and this is what they're publishing as their beliefs to say publicly that they are against the war. And you could evaluate here a little bit. I think Liebknecht, in the summer of 1914, did vote for war credits, but within 6 months he was voting against it. So it's a fair point, and it's a little bit it's a little bit pedantic to say that they hadn't always been against it. Certainly here in this source they are against it. But what's nice here is drawing the thing out of the source, showing understanding what they're on about, showing, yes, I understand that they were against it. They had a pretty good track record of being against it, certainly better than anyone else in Germany. And it's a helpful thing. Also, it's helpful for knowing about their beliefs, because this is from the manifesto, which literally is written to publish what their beliefs are. The final belief, effectively outlined in the source, is that the Spartacists are of the opinion that the oppression of the working class is not only confined to Germany, but is a global issue. This is indicated by the summoning of proletarians of all nations to fight in the common struggle in an attempt by the leaders of the Spartacists to emulate the revolution of the Bolsheviks from 1917. So that's just a little smidge of own knowledge there. We haven't really got any evidence, particularly that they were in favour of that. But this is the fourth point that they've made here about their beliefs. And as you get further down the paragraph, obviously, you're going to have to make your points a bit quicker just because of time. So let's move on to. We should see a similar thing in the second part, and I'll just try and pick up on the skills that they're showing there as we do that. The second aspect highlighted in the source is the reasons for the Spartacus uprising in 1919. The primary reason, which is mentioned, is that the conditions within Germany were right for revolution, as the masses agreed with them enthusiastically. So here, understanding of the source. This is valid to some extent, as by 1918 the Spartacists did have a national membership of approximately 5,000, and therefore they did have significant backing. So here we've already got some evaluations of that of this point that they're making, and we've got some evidence that they did have this national backing. However, this statement is fundamentally undermined by the fact that their own leader, Rosa Luxemburg, founder of the Red Flag, was opposed to and voted against the revolution, therefore hindering the usefulness of the source, as the language does not concede to the full beliefs of the faction's key leaders. That's slightly kind of cumbersomely phrased, but what they're saying, oh, steady, wrong color. What they're saying here is that although the source is claiming that their reason for rising up is that they have mass support, actually we have good evidence from Rosa Luxemburg's reluctance to rise up that key leaders in the Spartacists knew that they didn't have as much support as they were claiming, and therefore that's not a key reason for their uprising. So when the source claims this, it's it's kind of true. They must have thought they had some support, but it's not completely true. And probably what they were doing in that manifesto is saying, "Oh yes, everyone supports us," in order to encourage their supporters to rise up, and in order to encourage more people to support them, which is a point they could have made here, but they've moved on. Furthermore, a second reason highlighted for the uprising is that by stating, let's scroll down, workers and soldiers' councils have been formed everywhere, The source is clearly depicting that there was a socialist appetite within Germany which would strengthen the revolution. Now, this is a similar point, I think, to the first one, and that's a slight weakness of this answer. But again, they've picked something out of the source, they've shown an understanding of what the source is claiming, and they're going to back it up with their own knowledge. This is true to some extent. The socialist parties had gained political strength within Germany. But then they're going to evaluate it. However, so they said true to some extent. Here's the evidence for that. However, limitations to this argument. Oh, it's not quite as true as it might seem. We know that. In fact, they've said that historians such as Kold, Feldman, and Kluger. This is they've been reading Stephen Lee's article on this. State that the Spartacists did not have assumed control over the workers and soldiers' councils. So, in other words, that the Spartacists are again exaggerating the socialist appetite. There were workers and soldiers' councils everywhere, but the Spartacists did not have control of those and couldn't really speak for them. In addition, there is also the belief that these councils were only moderate. So this is the point that Kold, Feldman, and Kluger have made, that the councils were only moderate, and so when the Spartans say, "Oh, there are councils everywhere," that shows that there's an appetite for this. Actually, the councils might have been everywhere, but that did not mean that they were in favour of communist uprisings. So indicating the great extent in which the Spartacists were radical communists acting in a rash manner without significant support. I mean, what might be said here is that it might be true that the Spartacists or some of the Spartacists did believe this. So this was a reason for them uprising, but it's not wasn't a great reason, as it turned out. Overall, the source proves to be less valuable in determining the reasons for the Spartacist uprising, which may be due to the source not being representative of the true political conditions in Germany, as it was published 2 months prior to the uprising. So again, just if I'm going to zoom out slightly, what we'll see when we zoom out here is how the colours are this is really kind of helpful. So what I've tried to do is that the pink bit is where they're showing understanding of the source. They've got points from the source where they're quoting the source. The blue stuff is using actual knowledge, factual knowledge. So it's beyond just saying I know about this. That's kind of like, here is the actual kind of evidence. And then the green stuff is where they're giving either a judgment or where they're mentioning the provenance of the source, that when it was written, why it was written. They talked about the Spartacist Manifesto up there as well. And this is nice because you can see how it just kind of sandwiches together, that they make a point, there's some evidence, here's some judgment. Make a point, there's some evidence, here's some judgment. And that wraps up the overall value of it. Make a point, in fact, judgment straight away backed up by the evidence. It doesn't need to be in the order that we've got, but in any case, point, judgment, evidence together, and then move on. In fact, in this case, they're evaluating, so there's a bit more evidence and evaluation. Point, judgment, evidence, and then here comes the evaluation backed up by more evidence. So, so that's really, really good, and that's why this is a strong answer. That said, I mean, slight weaknesses in the answer. These 2 points here are pretty similar, and there are only 2 points there. I'd quite like to see a third if possible, but that's because I'm greedy. Again, I would say that it is better. The exam board, it seems, want quality rather than quantity. So it wouldn't matter that this has only got 2 points here if they were both done really well, and I think they are. That's not a kind of a deal breaker on the mark. So let's have a quick look at the conclusion down the bottom, the final judgment. In conclusion, the overarching usefulness of the source is undeniable, especially in clearly depicting the overall beliefs of the Spartacists. So beliefs, yes, which primarily hinges upon the fact that the provenance of the source, as it is directly from the leaders of the faction. So they're linking in the provenance there with the usefulness of the content. It's a manifesto. They're saying it themselves. It's ideal for picking up their beliefs. However, although there are valid reasons to put forward for the causes of the uprising, there are significant limitations to the usefulness of the source. For that reason, it should say there, for that reason. Overall, one can state that the source is useful to a significant extent, despite its minor limitations. And what they could have done a little bit better there at the end is to sort of flesh out that it is a really useful source, but it's really useful for the beliefs, slightly less useful for the, but not useless for the reasons, and that therefore overall it's a useful source on balance. Good. So just to pop back, in fact, to the mark scheme here. Have they interrogated the source? Yeah, I think they have, because they've really shown an understanding of those points, and those points were well drawn out. And I would say there was confidence there and some discrimination too, although perhaps sort of overlapping points in the second bit. Have they used their knowledge to illuminate? Yeah, really well. And their knowledge was very good, and it was used always to explain the point that they pulled out really nicely, very very well tied together. Have they evaluated? Yeah, again, really well. Each point had some evaluation. It was clear whether they thought each point was useful or not. And they didn't overuse the provenance, but they used the provenance to link in with that content and to be clear why it was useful for that particular thing. So just to re-emphasize again, the example says you must do these three things. You must show a knowledge of an understanding of the source. You must have good knowledge about the context which the source is written in, and you must think about how useful it is and include some thinking about the provenance. The example does not say exactly how to structure it, but the structure that I've just shown you works really well and showed off the skills and knowledge of that particular student very nicely, and would certainly have got them a high mark, and I think sort of nudging into level 5. So I hope that's useful, and yeah, we'll try and do some more. Cheerio.